right, folks, it's still February, and we're still talking about the DoD IG audit report of the DoD's process for authorizing C3PAOs to perform CMMC assessments. This is part 2 of 4 of our series diving into the IG report that everybody loves to talk about and have an opinion on, but nobody wants to actually read. So in the previous episode, we talked about the findings and recommendations specific to the DoD CIO and the CMMC Program Management Office. This episode, we're going to talk about the findings specific to the Cyber AB themselves. That's what we're going to talk about today.
So never in the show's history have we dug into an IG report like this. And I'm glad that this is the first one that we decided to do because, as the program is kicking off, the last thing that we need, again, as I referenced last week's show, a blast from the past to come up and kind of hinder progress, right? So it's better to get in deep, get in the understanding, see what's happening, see what's already happened. And that's what we're going to do over the next couple episodes.
Yeah, absolutely. People should be cheering the IG report and their findings for improving on processes because we all cheered when the IG found consistent, widespread, wild amounts of cybersecurity non-compliance in the DIB, right? Didn't forget about those IG reports, right? Well, we got something for y'all coming up in the future after we finish this series, but we're looking at what the IG reported here so that we can make the process better rather than using the findings in the IG report to write off a helpful program altogether, as so many people want to do. So let's cover the basics here, the basic context. If you didn't catch the previous episode, you should go back and check it out. So DoD contractors that maintain controlled unclassified information that is critical to national security must undergo CMMC Level 2 assessments performed by authorized CMMC third-party assessment organizations known as C3PAOs. In November of 2020, the DoD issued what's known as a no-cost contract to the CMMC accreditation body, now known as the Cyber AB, to manage the C3PAO authorization process and ensure that candidate C3PAOs meet all of the requirements in that process. Candidate C3PAOs must successfully complete a series of 12 requirements before they can be authorized to perform CMMC Level 2 assessments. And the DoD Inspector General sought to determine whether or not the DoD ensured that the process for authorizing the C3PAOs to conduct CMMC Level 2 assessments was effectively implemented. So they're looking to see, are they effectively implementing this 12-step process for authorizing C3PAOs? In order to do this, the Inspector General did two things. They reviewed the application packages of 11 of the 48 C3PAOs the Cyber AB had authorized to perform CMMC Level 2 assessments as of September of 2023. Please note that these are the findings and recommendations before the CMMC final rule was published, before the CMMC program went into effect. So if you only read the summary page as it was written before the final rule, you go, oh my God, a bunch of these things are unresolved findings and everything's on fire, when in actuality, it was all taken care of in the final rule, as we'll see. And a lot of those findings and recommendations are no longer open. They're closed or resolved or whatever. Okay. In addition to reviewing those application packages for those 11 C3PAOs, they also observed 3 CMMC Level 2 assessments conducted by DIBCAC, because for organizations to become C3PAOs, they have to go through a CMMC Level 2 assessment conducted by DoD's auditing team, known as DIBCAC. Overall, the IG made 10 recommendations, and today we're talking about what they specifically recommended for the Cyber AB. We've already covered the specific recommendations for the CIO CMMC PMO's office in a previous episode, which we'll link below, and we'll cover the rest of the recommendations in upcoming episodes.
The only hope that I have is that people understand exactly what this process represents, right? The quality assurance aspect of something is supposed to be getting done, and there is a process that has been determined the way that needs to to be done. Is that process being carried out effectively? They are just checking that. This is common practice. This isn't somebody did something wrong. There's no red flags. We're going to attack this. We need to make sure that we're doing what we're saying we're doing.
Yep. It's an audit. It is not an investigation. Those are two very different things. Okay, so let's talk about this 12-step authorization process so that people have the context of what the IG was looking at. So, three different organizations have responsibilities associated with the process for authorizing C3PAOs. There is the Cyber Accreditation Body, the Cyber AB, the CMMC Program Management Office, the CMMC PMO. This is where Stacy Bosjanik is leading the charge. And then you have the Defense Industrial Base Cybersecurity Assessment Center, also known as DIBCAC, which is a function under the Defense Contract Management Agency. This is DoD's specific auditing team. Okay, so you have 12 steps in this authorization process. The Cyber AB is responsible for overseeing 10 of them. They're responsible for overseeing the submission of C3PAO applications to the Cyber AB, the payment of application fees, passing organizational background checks performed by the Cyber AB, passing foreign ownership control or influence reviews, participating in interviews to outline the C3PAO's business operations and assessment readiness, signing C3PAO agreements and codes of professional conduct paperwork, paying activation fees, providing verification of insurance, implementing an assessment appeals process that is approved by the Cyber AB, and employing or awarding contracts to CMMC certified assessors or certified quality control lead personnel actually working for the C3PAO. The other two steps are the responsibilities of the other two entities. So the CMMC PMO, in addition to being responsible for assessment guides, policy, oversight of the AB, and all the other stuff that they're responsible for within this authorization process, they are responsible for performing a separate organizational background check to assess the candidate C3PO's operational risks. And then DIBCAC is responsible for conducting CMMC Level 2 assessment of the candidate C3PAOs, because the DoD requires that the candidate C3PAOs undergo the same assessment that they will be responsible for performing once they're authorized, which in my opinion is a great policy. Okay, so the DoD IG, the Inspector General, identified deficiencies concerning the successful completion of 3 of these 12 requirements in this step, which according to them in general supports the need for a quality assurance process, which is what we talked about in the previous episode. The IG overall made 10 recommendations. 3 of them are mostly related to the CIO and the CMMC PMO, other episode. 5 are mostly related to the Cyber AB, what we're going to talk about right now. And then 2 are related to DIBCAC's operation, which we're going to talk about in a different episode. So let's talk about the status of these recommendations, because it's not like, oh, the report comes out and every recommendation is like a red hot alarm that's going off and nothing has been done and these are open findings, right? So 5 of these 10 recommendations are what is known as unresolved, which means that the management, the PMO, the CIO, or whoever has not agreed to implement the recommendation, or they have not proposed actions that will address the recommendation in full. 4 of the recommendations are resolved, which means that they have agreed to implement the recommendation, or they have proposed actions that address the underlying finding that generated the recommendation. And then 1 of the recommendations is closed, which means that the Office of the Inspector General verified that the agreed upon corrective actions were fully implemented. So half of them are closed or resolved, half of them are unresolved. But as we talked about in the last episode, as we're going to talk about right now, unresolved usually means that there are only partial issues remaining. And it's a debate as to whether or not those partial issues remaining are actually issues. But that's what we're going to talk about. So you can decide whether you think that these issues are as big of a deal as some people may have led you to believe in their coverage of the report.
Yeah, it's all a matter of varying perspectives. To be honest, Jacob, it's the varying perspectives and the unresolved issue that we covered last week, and then the perspectives that are offered here. There were findings, right, and then the recommendations that were made are from the perspective of each individual organization that we're breaking it down to their part in the process that can be improved based on the recommendations, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And just something to think about. I'm not adding my opinion. I'm not coloring or editorializing any of the findings, but something to consider. We'll get to that in the last episode, but something to consider here. Everyone clamoring for plans of action and milestones and for forgiveness for partially implemented requirements don't seem to have a lot of grace for people who would be able to use POAMs for their own findings in their own audits, as it might be. So, glass houses, everybody. Anyways,
Apparently, the groundhog seeing a shadow not only indicates 6 more weeks of winter, but 2 weeks of Jacob Horn not imposing his opinion.
not
And
imposing my opinions. We're just putting the information out here in a more easily consumable fashion so that you can decide what's going on. I'll save my opinion. Well, I have plenty of them. I'll save them for the last episode in this series. Okay, so there's multiple findings that each have multiple recommendations. Let's summarize them real quick. We'll go into them in detail. So the IG found that the cyber AB officials did not maintain a signed C3PAO agreement and code of professional conduct for 2 of the 11 C3PAOs that were reviewed. As a result, the IG had one recommendation for the cyber AB. The CMMC PMO should require the cyber AB to verify that the cyber AB has signed C3PAO agreements and codes of professional conduct for every authorized C3PAO and revoke the authorizations to perform level 2 assessments until those documents are received. That recommendation is currently resolved. We'll talk about why in a little bit. The IG also found that the cyber AB officials did not verify that the quality control leads for 4 of the 11 C3PAOs were certified. And as a result, the IG had 2 recommendations for the AB. First, the CMMC PMO should require the AB to develop a formalized quality control lead certification requirement. That recommendation is closed. It is as dead as it can get. And 2, verify that the quality lead for every authorized C3PO meets their certification requirements. And for any quality leads that don't meet their certification requirement, revoke that C3PO's authorization to perform level 2 assessments until they are verified. This recommendation is resolved. So 2 findings, 3 recommendations, all resolved or closed so far. In addition to those, the IG found that cyber AB officials' methodology for verifying that CCAs and quality control leads were on staff was inadequate. And as a result, the IG had 2 recommendations for the AB: that the PMO should require the AB to verify employment status of CCLs and quality leads by requesting and reviewing employment records to confirm that they are part of the C3PO staff and assigned to those specific roles and responsibilities. In addition, verify the employment status of all previously authorized C3PAOs using this method and revoke their authorization to conduct level 2 assessments if the employment status can't be verified. Those 2 recommendations are currently unresolved. So we've got 5 recommendations, 3 of which are resolved or closed, 2 of which are unresolved. That's the summary.
This is one of the ones that was covered in the town hall last month. And so the explanation that was given for this from the perspective of the AB realistically is just, again, a difference of perspective. They thought that, and even me, from my perspective, thought that what they were doing was adequate. And apparently the IG says that's not adequate. You need more to be more in depth. So
yeah. So this is going to be a matter of opinion, much like
Yeah.
the last episode. It's really a matter of opinion. Did you think that the CMC PMO's process for quality assurance over the overall 12-step process is sufficient or not? And they currently disagree, and people are free to come up with their opinion. Here, there are some that are resolved and closed. So not that your opinion doesn't matter, but there's nothing that is left up for debate. However, there are some that are unresolved. And so it's really interesting to see what people's thoughts are. So let's talk about the details of these findings and recommendations. So the first one, this paperwork finding, if you will. So the PMO should require the cyber AB to verify that the cyber AB has signed C3PAO agreements and codes of professional conduct for every authorized C3PAO and revoke C3PAO authorization to perform assessments until the documents are received. So the way that the report is structured, they don't have the paperwork that people need to sign for professional conduct. They don't have a mechanism for holding these people accountable if they don't comply with their C3PO agreement. Oh my God, everything's on fire. And if you go all the way to the bottom of the report, several pages later, you're actually, that recommendation isn't a problem. It's resolved because, as the IG says, the DoD CIO, quote, addressed all specifics of this recommendation. So it is no longer an open finding. So the DoD CIO, in response to what the IG found, said 4 things. First, the CMMC PMO received confirmation from the cyber AB that all currently authorized C3PAOs have provided the required C3PAO agreements and codes of professional conduct. So they are not missing the paperwork. The Cyber AB will retain the associated documentation on file, which makes total sense. 3, the CMMC PMO director requested that the Cyber AB implement a process to report the documentation status of each C3PAO in advance of any future authorizations. Totally fine. And 4, they will pursue a contract modification to clarify the reporting requirement and to align the contract with the final rule. Standard procedure. Totally fine. Meets the intent of the recommendations. So this missing paperwork issue is no longer an issue. It is resolved.
Yeah. So, and to align with the final rule, what happened when the final rule came out? The new code of professional conduct and the reauthorization of the C3PAOs. Well, in that reauthorization process, we checked and made sure that all that stuff was signed because it was one of the steps. So, big nothing burger.
Now, according to the Cyber AB and this IG finding, the Cyber AB migrated information systems while they were waiting on the final rule to come out, and they couldn't find the paperwork for 2 of the C3PAOs. Naughty, naughty. You got to maintain the paperwork. That's exactly the most important part that literally everybody gets hung up on. If you don't have the paperwork, you can't prove it, right? That's what we talk about all the time. Doesn't matter if you're talking about individual 800-171 requirements. Doesn't matter if you're talking about filing your taxes. Doesn't matter if you're talking about going through an IG report. If you just say that you did it and you can't prove it, then it doesn't matter. However, all of these findings were done before the rule was final. And now that the rule is final and everything has been updated, there is no missing paperwork. So if you only read the top of the IG report and you don't read how things were resolved or not, you would be led to believe that every single thing that the IG found is not only true, that it's a red alert and that everything is on fire, and that's not true.
Yeah, and it would demonstrate that processes aren't being carried out the same every single time as well.
Yeah. So let's talk about this second finding and set of recommendations, this quality control lead finding, if you will. So the DoD IG recommended that the CMMC PMO, sorry for the acronyms, should require the cyber accreditation body to do 2 things: develop a formalized quality control lead certification requirement and verify that the quality control lead for every authorized C3PO meets their certification requirement. This first part, develop a formal quality control lead certification, is closed because the requirement in the final rule that C3PAOs implement a quality assurance function and the individual performing the quality assurance must be a CCA independent of the assessment team, according to the IG, meets the intent of the recommendation, right? The IG will say what you need is you need a separate certification just for the person doing quality. CCP, CCA, QCL. You need a formal test. You need a formal exam fee. They don't have to deal with any of the overhead of creating this extra process or certification. They don't have to rewrite the rule. They're not involved in rulemaking. They just get to say, you should come up with a new certification. Well, it's not in the final rule, but the process for ensuring that quality over assessments is in the final rule. Therefore, it is a closed recommendation because they met the intent of the recommendation without having to come up with a quality lead certification.
In the field, that's what we like to call alternative implementation.
That is a perfect example. That is a perfect example of exactly what that means. Is they said
that's my one for the month.
There
I'll
you
be
go.
Here if you
That's
need me.
great. Yeah. So it actually is not an open finding, unlike the first page summary or some of the more outlandish news headlines and social media hot takes that they don't have quality leads in the process. They do have quality leads in the process. It's a closed recommendation. Okay.
It's an impartial CCA. It's a person that has the same capabilities to go through it. Wasn't the big hang up with the QCLs is that the technical knowledge and stuff like that, and like knowing exactly what the certification needed to be.
Yeah,
why wouldn't you take somebody that is
the original concept of quality lead didn't require you to be a CCA that had actually, been qualified to go through and lead assessments, right? And go through and lead a team of CCPs. You were just an independent function. If anything, this is better. It's better. So
I agree.
Yeah, regardless, it's a finding, but it's closed. And they don't list that in the first page, which can lead you to believe that the finding is still an issue. Let's talk about this other finding and recommendation. So they said that they need to verify that the quality lead for every authorized C3PAO meets the certification requirement. And for any quality leads that don't, revoke the C3PAO's authorization to perform level 2 assessments until they are. This recommendation is resolved. This is not an open recommendation based off of an open finding because, according to the IG, actions taken by the CMMC PMO meet the intent of the recommendation. So the DoD CIO responded and they said 4 things. The final rule and the DoD contract with the Cyber AB subjects C3PAOs to quality reviews and requires that the Cyber AB ensure that C3PAOs implement their quality assurance function, which we just talked about. In addition, the DoD will pursue a contract modification with the AB to clarify these quality assurance functions. All C3PAOs must be reauthorized before they can begin performing CMMC assessments, which is what we are currently witnessing and have witnessed since December 16th when the rule went into effect. If you are calling a C3PAO now and booking a CMMC assessment, you are doing that with someone who has been reauthorized once the rule was final, not somebody who was authorized as a C3PAO prior to the rule being final, which was the time frame of this IG report. And then finally, reauthorization includes verification that the quality lead is a CCA with the appropriate technical qualifications and assessment experience. And so as a result, the recommendation is resolved. So everything related to quality leads, certifications, quality leads, overseeing assessment results, quality leads, and the AB's responsibilities and the CMC's oversight of those responsibilities are closed, resolved, good to go.
Not going to throw crazy opinion into this, but again, one of the things when I read the report initially and I saw the findings and read all the way through, a lot of the things were what's the word that I'm looking at? Like on the fence items that the AB had to go with the intent of the DoD and the intent of the final rule to try to develop something. And then once they knew what the intent was going to be, or once it was kind of in the rule, you notice that they were shaping up. And that's how all these things are coming out resolved so quickly, in my opinion. I won't opine anymore, but
yeah. Now, to be fair to the IG, and as we stressed when they announced this project back in the day, is that the IG does tons of audits of tons of different programs all the time. And so they aren't clued into rulemaking. They aren't clued into the details of these programs. They don't really know. And so they're going to come up with these recommendations. And then there's a back and forth between the people that they're recommending these actions to and the people who are actually going to take action about what the proper solution is going to be. And so they're like, well, I don't know, just make a quality certification. You got a CCP certification, you got a CCA certification. It's not how rulemaking works. And the rule is already going up for final publication. So it's not a thing that's going to happen. Instead, we're going to do this other thing. And they're like, yeah, it's good enough. But if you don't read the whole report, you won't see that back and forth. And it'll seem like every finding is a horrible dumpster fire.
To kind of put it into perspective, it's more suspect if the IG didn't do a report on the program.
Well, I mean, the audits are all pretty routine, and it just so happened that the short straw was drawn for this process to come up during that round of project announcements. I'm not going to add what I think the IG should have done. However,
you will not take
so that everybody knows, the IG report was done on the authorization process before the final rule was final, right? And so as a result, all of their things are going to have big caveats on them. All their findings are probably going to end up being mostly resolved or partially resolved, because once the process is final, then you should have done the audit, but we'll save that for another day. Okay. Let's talk about the findings that are unresolved, because this is where people's opinions and your thoughts come into play. What do you think is the sufficient answer for what is going on? So these are the employment verification finding issues, if you will. Mm-hmm. So the DoD IG recommended 2 things. The CMMC PMO should require the Cyber AB to verify employment status of CCAs and quality leads by requesting and reviewing employment records to confirm that they are part of C3PAO staff and that they are assigned to those specific roles and responsibilities. In addition, they should verify the employment status of all previous authorized C3PAOs using this methodology and revoke authorization to perform assessments if employment status cannot be verified. These recommendations are unresolved because, according to the IG, the comments from the DoD CIO did not address the specifics of the recommendation. The DoD CIO said in response to these findings that the DoD cannot mandate that individuals assigned to quality assurance functions or any other staff be employed as permanent members of the C3PAO because the DoD is limited by the CMMC roles and responsibilities published in the final rule and the forces of an open market ecosystem. So, what do you think? What do you think? The rule does not say that they can mandate who works for who, or that you have a certain number, or the nature of their employment with you at the time that they're going through this 12-step process. It's up to the market. Do you need to have the staff in order to be a certified C3PAO? What do you think? The IG says that they need to do this employment verification. The CIO says we can't force them to do that. That's not how this process is designed to work. Let's talk about some of the details in this finding that led the IG to this result. So according to the IG, Cyber AB officials authorized all 11 C3PAOs that they evaluated to perform level 2 assessments without adequately verifying that the C3PAOs had both a CCA and a certified QCL on staff under contract. Sounds really bad. That sounds terrible. Specifically, the Cyber AB authorized 7 of the 11 C3PAOs without verifying that there was a CCA on staff, and 10 of the 11 C3PAOs without adequately verifying that there was a QCL on staff. Now remember, at the time that this was written, there was no such thing as a QCL. That recommendation was closed. Anyways, for the CCAs and quality leads that were under contract, however, the Cyber AB did adequately review the contract terms and conditions to verify that they were responsible for leading and overseeing CMMC Level 2 assessments. So when they did work for C3PAOs on staff, there was no problem, right? The problem happened when they say, however, for others reportedly on staff, the Cyber AB requested that their business email address, and if the address matched the candidate C3PAO's naming convention, then the Cyber AB considered them to be valid employees. Requesting a business email address, according to the IG, is not an adequate method for verifying employment for 2 reasons. One, if the candidate C3PAO's system administrators don't delete user email addresses when they leave a company, the user would still have an active email address. So it's not guaranteed that having an email address means that you're currently working for the company. And ensuring that the employee has a valid user email address does not provide verification that the employee is in a position and currently responsible for leading and overseeing level 2 assessments. So when they had employees on staff at C3PAOs, there was no issue with how the AB was verifying. When those companies allegedly said that they had these people on staff, they gave them the business email addresses that corresponded with the people that they said were on staff, and the AB accepted the existence of these email accounts as saying you currently have the staff. So the IG said that method of verifying employment status is not sufficient. You need a more sufficient methodology for verifying employment status, specifically that you should request and review employment records to confirm that they are indeed on staff and assigned those responsibilities. But as the CIO said, they can't do that. They can't force them to do that. So as a result, we're at a bit of an impasse here. And as a result, the finding is unresolved. So what do you think in chat, in the comments after this live stream? What do you think the answer is? Do you think that requesting a business email address is a valid enough way of judging whether or not they have people on staff and judging that those people on staff are assigned the appropriate responsibilities? Do you think that they should have to prove through employment verification paperwork, which they did for the companies that did have it, and that should be the method for all of them? How do we get around the fact that that's not in the final rule text? Should this be an update in future rulemaking? Would that resolve the status if the IG and the DoD says, well, we're going to take care of this in CMMC 3.0? Is this a problem? What do you think?
I mean, and we also have to acknowledge the fact that the C3PAO community operates in a majority of a 1099 fashion, right? Like,
Yep.
so like, yeah, there's going to be journeyman assessors. There's going to be journeywoman assessors to be appropriate or whatever. But there's going to be the people that conduct assessments on multiple C3PAOs. And so I understand the need, but where do you draw the line as to what is the adequate employee record that demonstrates that I'm there? Do I need your W-2 that you submitted? Do I need where does that go, right?
Yeah. So just to summarize here, there are 10 recommendations in this IG report for the overall process that the DoD uses to authorize C3PAOs to conduct assessments. 5 of them are related to the AB, and the only one that is currently unresolved is whether or not business email addresses are robust enough of a method for verifying employment. That's it. That's it. So is this the actual unrestricted, out of control dumpster fire that people made it out to be on social media? Is this actually an emergency situation that would doom the CMMC program because there's no quality assurance whatsoever over 10 of the 12 steps? Is that actually an accurate summary that the DoD IG provided on their first page of the summary here? What do you think? I know what I think, but that's not what we're talking about in this episode. I want to know what you guys think. Is that actually what you thought the report said? Is that actually what the first page said? Do you think that this is an issue? Do you think it's a bigger issue than the report even purports it to be? What do you think? Let us know. And we'll take some of those comments and opinions and we'll roll them into the final episode when we talk about what we think.
I think that people trapped in a dark cave would pay any amount of money for a flashlight. We'll see you next week.
See you guys next week.